come to this third reflection, and we'll be reflecting on the cross as the truth that we discover. And it's interesting to think that even our great saints spent time in discovering the cross. It didn't hit them straight away. There are various stories of our saints coming to a very deep realization of what the cross means in the life of Jesus and in the life of every one of his followers. So I want to begin with just a reminder that when we come to the celebration of the Passion in 2 days' time on Good Friday, there is that part where we adore the cross. And the cross is brought in by the minister, by the deacon, and 3 times he uses the phrase, "Behold the wood of the cross, on which is hung our salvation. Come, let us adore." And that's very central to that celebration of the Passion of our Lord. Behold the wood of the cross. Behold the one who hangs on the cross. And come, let us adore. Now, it's that word, behold, which is another way of saying, look and see. And at the heart of the Carmelite contemplative story, that word looking is very important. You might remember coming to Mass a number of days ago, and the story was from the book of Numbers, and the people were in the desert, and they began to rebel. And in their rebellion, God sent snakes among them, somewhat to punish them. And the snakes began to bite. And they pleaded with Moses to save them. And God said to Moses, "Take a snake, put it on a pole, and put it in the middle of where the people are. And when they look at it, when they behold it, they will be saved." So what kind of a looking was that? If they looked for the sake of curiosity and nothing more, if they looked at it just passing by, probably they wouldn't be saved. But in that looking, there had to be their feeling of being sorry for what they had done, their feeling of renewed faith in God, and somehow looking at that snake on the pole as if they really wanted to be saved from these awful snakes that were biting them. In John's Gospel, Jesus himself makes reference to that idea, because he says to the people who are unwilling to believe in him, "When the Son of Man is raised up, the way the serpent was, and people will behold the Son of Man raised up, then you will know that I am the Son of God." So it was in Jesus' mind, this idea of he being raised up and the people looking at him and being transformed by that way of looking at him. And so we have that story of the centurion, the Roman soldier, right when Jesus was dying, and Jesus had died, and he looks at him. He looked at him, and he said, "This truly is the Son of God." So there's the combination of looking, and through our looking, coming to believe. And so it is significant that for us, followers of Jesus, in so many of our homes, and certainly in our churches, we continue to put the crucifix on the wall or on the table in front of us. Not just as an ornament, not just as a symbol, but in these moments to look at the one who was crucified and somehow allow ourselves to be drawn in to the mystery of what's happening on the cross. In this looking, you look and you look again. You look and you look deeply and you love what you see, because in that looking, you discover what God has put there. Interesting if you apply that to people that you live with. And sometimes we find it difficult to appreciate one another. Well, the looking can help there too. When you look at the other person, a person you have difficulty in liking or loving, and you look deeply, and you begin to see what God has put in that person, and you love what you see. When we approach the cross, one of the best places to be is beside or in the place of Mary, his mother, who looked all the time. And Mary's heart had been shaped to understand more than the rest of us what was going on. Simeon the prophet had warned her that there would be this kind of suffering in her life, and that her son had come to separate humanity for the rise and fall of many human beings. And Mary has lived with Christ, has lived with Jesus all these years, and now stands at the foot of the cross. And she sees this son brought to a point where now he has nothing. Any kind of material welfare or material wealth he might have had is gone. Down to his last garment is gone. There's only a handful of people standing around to support him. All the others are shouting, "Crucify him." And on the cross, not only has he lost all his material well-being, but his dignity. He is being crucified the way the worst of criminals were put to death. Jesus is reduced to nothing. And why? One, to be able to say to us, I was prepared to give everything for your salvation. There was nothing I was going to hold back. I was never going to protest and say, this is not fair. Jesus went to the cross in obedience to something. We say it was in obedience to the will of the Father. Yes. But how was that expressed? It was in obedience to the brokenness of humanity. And in his understanding, the way to redeem the brokenness and sinfulness of humanity was by taking upon himself that very same brokenness and reducing it to nothing, letting all of that go in the face of the Father, who would be the one who would raise him from the dead. But Christ came to nothing, to the point where even he has to say, Father, why have you abandoned me? So he didn't even have the satisfaction of knowing, I'm doing all of this, but I know I am filled with joy from the Father. And no, there was nothing there for Jesus other than his willingness to obey so that he might take on himself all our sinfulness and reduce it to nothing, and so give us salvation. You know that phrase in the gospel where, among his last words, Jesus cries out, "It is now finished. It is consummated." And it seems what he was referring to on the cross was all that debt of humanity, all that sadness in humanity's story was now ended. The debt was gone and the story is changing. The story is changing from the realm of death into the realm of new life and resurrection. And so we look at ourselves as we ponder that mystery, and we look at others along the way who have pondered that mystery and maybe learn from what they say. And certainly the writings of St. Paul give us so much understanding. And Paul wasn't there at the time, but he encountered the risen Lord and understood that the risen Lord was the one who died on the cross. And so Paul, in two very important letters, to the Philippians and to the Galatians, helps us to understand just how central this truth is to our faith. Paul says the only thing he believes is important to know is Christ, and Christ crucified. Not Christ risen, Christ crucified. Because from there we can understand the depth of God's love for us. In a sense, had Christ risen without the cross, had he gone off on his holidays and come back, whoopee, I'm risen, would we understand the depth of God's love expressed in the humanity of Christ? And so Paul says, with that idea, really nothing else is important for our life and for our faith, to understand how capable the human person is of loving. Because Christ died on the cross in all his humanity to show us the kind of love of which we are capable. And so he says, anything else, and he uses the phrase, anything else is just rubbish for me, as long as I know Christ Jesus and him crucified. And in the letter to the Galatians, he tells us again that it was Christ who saved him by giving his life for him. Now, in the midst of this, and it'll come, I hope, more clearly as we go along, is the idea that what Christ did, Mary unites herself totally with that. And the expectation is that each of us would do the same. There are two little phrases in the gospel that might help us. One I've referred to already. It's the idea of looking at that cross and uniting ourselves with the person on the cross and what the person stood for at that moment. The other one is when, you remember when the two disciples come to Jesus, James and John, and they say, "Master, will you let us sit, one at your right, one at your left in the kingdom?" And he smiles and he said, "Ooh, do you know what you're asking? Can you drink the chalice that I have to drink? And can you accept the baptism with which I will be baptized?" And that's a wonderful approach to adult baptism. That I, by being baptized, accept that kind of transformation in my life that allows me to be united with Jesus as an adult, as the one who dies on the cross, I will drink that chalice and I will accept that baptism. And that's there to help us to allow this story to get in on us. It's not just curiosity. It's not just a nice thing that we read in a book as a fact of history. The whole idea is that we allow that story, that gift of God, to get into us and become part of our lives, so that in a very real sense, we are sharing in that mission of Jesus, in his desire to save, and to save particularly the sick and the sinners, because those who are already saved don't need the Savior. But in fact, all of humanity stands in need of salvation. And so, think a little about some of our saints, the Carmelite saints, and we have a few of them here: Teresa of Avila, Therese, Mary Magdalene de Pazzi, Titus Brandsmith. So these are the ones, the Carmelite saints, who, when you look at them, if you had a book here with a collection of pictures of these saints, more often than not, you will find them holding on to the cross. Holding on to the cross for dear life, but holding on to the cross with gentleness and affection. This is my way of life. Teresa of Avila, the great Carmelite mystic and contemplative and reformer, was 39 years old. And up until then, she had lived a kind of a good life. She became a nun, she belonged to a very observant family and everything. But she tells the story of one day she goes into a chapel in her own convent, monastery, and somehow there was an image there of Christ crucified. And somehow it caught her attention. It was lying there because the sisters were going to take it out and use it for a celebration. It caught her eye, and somehow she was drawn in to that image of the suffering Christ. And she says, for the first time in her life, she broke down in a well of tears that wouldn't stop. And from then on, she had a whole different understanding of the cross. Mary Magdalene de Pazzi, 16th or 17th century mystic, she had experiences attached to the liturgy that allowed her, when the church was celebrating the Passion, it was like as if it was a play and she was now part of the play. She was there when all of this was happening. The God of her contemplation could not be an abstract God up in the clouds. It could only be God revealed in Jesus and in everything that happened in the life of Jesus. So here again, for her, Mary Magdalene de Pazzi, it's not a story that she reads in the newspaper. It's something that she beholds and looks at through the celebration of the liturgy and knows that it is something present in her life. So she accepts and loves this love that is on the cross. And she's remembered for running around the monastery, having had one of those experiences, saying, sisters, love must be loved. Love this love. Because love right now, because of the weakness of humanity, love is not loved. And she goes around ringing the bell to tell us that love was not loved. But what she understood was that when Christ suffered, Christ loved. Now, you know what we do. We talk to people and we say, you're going through a hard time, you're suffering. Offer it up for peace in the world or for your family and whatever. Offer it up. So we're really saying, my suffering is here. I offer it to God so that God will love that person and send his mercy. And he'll do that also with my offering of my suffering. This saint somehow understood it's a little bit more than offering it up. The actual suffering is our love. The suffering and my acceptance of the suffering is my love. So I want to love the whole world. And I know that this suffering is uniting me with Christ, if I accept it that way, who is in fact continuing to work on the salvation of the world. And so my understanding of suffering, as it was for Jesus on the cross, is in fact my way of saying, I love my brothers and sisters, my community, my family, my church, my world. That's the suffering. You will ask, does that reduce the pain, having all this spiritual consolation inside? Apparently not. Certainly from the saints we study, the pain was awful. What they went through was awful. At the same time, they're able to take that and say, this is the strength of my love. Edith Stein, Titus Brandsma, both dying in concentration camps. Edith Stein gives us a book that she calls The Science of the Cross. Now, it's not a science for which you could get a degree at the university. It's a science as a way of life. It's a science that makes us into a certain kind of person. That's the science, because it shapes our thinking, it shapes our understanding. And so she looks at the cross and says, if you are the kind of person who stands at the foot of the cross with Mary, and you accept what Jesus is giving you from the cross, you become a different kind of person. You are now somehow a lover of the cross, an understander of the cross, and that makes you different. You're not looking for the same things anymore. You're not behaving towards people in the same way anymore. Your thoughts about the future are not the same anymore. And you say to yourself, well, if the leaders in the world of today had anything of that understanding of salvation coming through giving, salvation coming through not looking for my own comfort, but by loving all humanity through suffering. That was Edith Stein's vision of the world, facing up to the terrible power of the Nazis. Titus Brandsma wrote various commentaries on the Stations of the Cross. And they're beautiful. 3 important ones. Long meditations on the Stations of the Cross. In one of them, commenting on the 12th station when Jesus dies, O God, I adore you in your annihilation, in your death on the cross. I adore you in your annihilation. Let others shake their heads and be scandalized. What a terrible thing, the cross. I will not cease to see you just as you are now, that I might learn how dearly God has loved me. And we know that that's the kind of spirit that sustained Titus in those terrible months that he spent in Dachau before his death. His understanding was that Jesus on the cross was the one we are to embrace. And by embracing Jesus on the cross, we, like Jesus, then leave ourselves open to the gift of the resurrection. And as a final little thought, it's a poem from St. Therese, one of her many poems. And in this one, she, in the English edition, it's given living by love. But here's just a verse of it. To live of love, 'tis not to fix one's tent on Tabor's height, and there with you remain. 'Tis to climb Calvary with strength now almost spent, and count your heavy cross our truest gain. In heaven, my life, a life of joy shall be. The heavy cross shall then be gone forever and ever. Here upon earth, in suffering with you, my love, let me stay. The idea in this Carmelite life of beholding, understanding, and in the liturgy we will say, behold the wood of the cross on which hung our salvation. Come, let us adore. And of course, if we've been at the Good Friday liturgy many times in our lives, we will remember those words. And we will remember that at the words, come, let us adore, we knelt down and got up again, and the liturgy went on. But the idea is that in that come, let us adore, we have somehow come to an appreciation of what the cross is in our lives because of what it was in the life of Christ.